We are joined by Yuval David, a filmmaker, director, actor, and activist joining us from Washington, D.C., and you're trying to change some of these perceptions. Yuval, thank you very much for joining us, and walk us through a little bit about what you're doing.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's I wish that things weren't as hard as they are even here in the United States. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I've been traveling across the country, across America, and speaking to campus groups, speaking with campus groups in synagogues, and as keynote speaker at rallies across the country. And so many people are singing the same song or saying the same things about they themselves facing anti-Semitism, facing this horrible hatred of Jews, where people keep saying how frightened they are to walk around in the streets wearing a Magen David because of things that are said to them. This is a horrible situation.
Yuval, here's the big question here, because a lot of these protesters are not saying that they're against Zionism. They're not saying they're against the policy of the Jewish state. They're out there chanting for genocide, chanting for gay as the Jews. How much of this can be argued against in the terms of policy or narrative? How much of this can we assume is just a blind hatred for Jews everywhere?
I think we can completely assume that it's a blind hatred for Jews everywhere when people are chanting "gas the Jews," saying that Jews are racist, saying that Jews are white supremacists, saying that Jews support apartheid. It's no longer just things that are about Israel. And when the terms anti-Israel and anti-Zionist truly are using the same tropes that have been used for years against Jews, it is anti-Semitism. When people are targeting Jews in the streets, at Hillel, Jewish centers on campuses, at Jewish synagogues, when we have to have security outside of our schools, our synagogues, our businesses. I even know Jewish business owners who've been taking the names of their businesses off of the buildings because they're not only concerned for themselves, they're concerned for their employees. When Jews are being targeted for being who we are, it is anti-Semitism. And to the people who are going and protesting, saying that they're protesting because they are pro-Hamas, if you're going to a protest and people chant things against Jewish people, and you go back to that same protest the following week, you now are no longer just complicit, you are completely involved in those anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish protests and demonstrations, which we've also seen have turned into riots, such as when people were trying to bash into the doors of Grand Central Station and occupy the subway system. Well, we know that Hamas likes to get into tunnels. Apparently, they want to do the same thing under the streets of New York City. We saw the same things where people are violently pushing each other and fighting, such as the protests in Berlin, such as scaling the fence of the White House just a week ago, such as writing graffiti on monuments across our nation's capital here in America. We have a serious problem. When people talk about anti-Semitism being on the rise, I say, no, you are wrong. It has already risen.
And given that sort of situation, that this is identifiably blind hatred, that this is identifiably anti-Semitism, how do you combat that? It's not something you can win in a narrative arena.
How do we combat that? We combat that by what I'm trying to instill in other people. All of us need to be activists. All of us need to be advocates. And that's not only the Jewish people. That includes our allies and to our potential allies. There are so many people who are afraid to speak up because they see all these crazy people marching in the streets and chanting and getting into heated arguments, and they just want to stay back. They don't want to get into it. We need to empower people who truly believe in human rights, who truly value democracy. If anybody values the ability for women to be in public as women, as openly, and wear whatever they want, for LGBTQ people like me, to be able to be open and proud. If anybody believes in the democratic process, they need to support Israel and they need to be against Hamas. The fact is that Gaza did not ever have a democratic control, at least not since 2005 when Hamas took over. So we need to remind these people, and we have the organizations like the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, and eye-rolling organization called Queers for Palestine, which send me hundreds of hateful messages every day. I know what happens to queers in Palestine. I've helped LGBTQ people escape Palestinian areas into safety. So these people are complete hypocrites
Absolutely.
if they are against
And
Israel and
Yuval,
against
we're
Jews.
going to